All right, happy 2026, everybody. Welcome to the first Fitness Edda episode of this year. As always, I am your host, Eric Castiglione, owner and head coach of Viking Athletics. And you had to know this was coming. I would be remiss in my duties as a nutrition coach to not address the new USDA guidelines. So we're going to go over the good, the bad, and the confusing pieces around it. First off, we're going to start with the history and purpose of the USDA guidelines. That's the U.S. Department of Agriculture. We're going to talk about the new guidelines, and then the confusion largely stems from some of the messaging and the messengers themselves. For those that have watched the announcement, both RFK Jr. and coming from the CrossFit world, those of you that don't know, Emily Kaplan is Greg Glassman's new partner. Emily Kaplan and Greg Glassman together founded the Broken Science Initiative, and their new venture, the affiliate arm of that, is the Metabolic Fix. People can now affiliate with MetFix. It is marketed as kind of an upstream continuation of CrossFit, designed to focus on longevity and really dial in the nutrition piece instead of just the exercise piece. In reality, nutrition was always part of the CrossFit methodology. It's just that the affiliates really heavily focused on the workout piece, and for overall lifestyle changes, a lot of times we see that nutrition was kind of left to the wayside. So Greg Glassman founded CrossFit, sold in 2020. His non-compete ended in 2024, and now that was when he launched the Broken Science Initiative. Emily Kaplan, his partner, is an advisor to RFK Jr., so both RFK Jr. and MetFix posted the South Park clip from 11 years ago, in which Cartman suggests that the USDA invert the pyramid, and at face value, based on what they've shown, and we'll get to that under the new guidelines, that is what the new pyramid is. If you read the recommendations, they're actually not that bad, and it is different than what has been shown. That's why there's confusion surrounding this, is they took a satire and not realizing that they're actually the butt of it, and posted it as, I don't know really what the intent was. To me, that's a self-own. They don't get that they're the butt of the joke. Anyway, a brief overview of the USDA. It was first established by Abraham Lincoln, and it was tasked with conducting R&D in as comprehensive manner as possible, related to agriculture, aquaculture, so fishing as well, rural development, and human nutrition. So that was when it was established. The first recommendations were given out in 1894, and they focused on calories, nutrients, variety, and affordability. So initially, food guidelines focused on nutrients specifically. And the first official food guide came out in 1916. It was titled Food for Young Children. It divided food into 5 groups. Meat and dairy were put together from the get-go. Cereals, fruit and veggies, fats, and sugars. And that stood until the 1940s, when, in order to keep our troops healthy, the Basic 7 Guide was published for wartime nutrition. 7 groups, and it got into some distinctions between types of vegetables. So you had green and yellow veggies as one group, oranges, tomato, cabbage, and potatoes, and other fruits and veggies was another big group. So it kind of segmented green and yellow veggies from other fruits and veggies. Still had milk, dairy, but that was no longer lumped in with meat. Meat, poultry, fish, eggs were another group. Instead of just cereals, it was bread and cereals. And then fats were left into butter, margarine. So they didn't have a separate group for fats. Animal meat and poultry and eggs have fat in them. That was a separate thing. Butter and margarine was kind of the fat group there. And the dietary recommendations were to get some food from each group every day. So they didn't really get into serving sizes. They just said try to get a little bit of all that. In the 1950s, I think it was 1956 in particular, the Basic Four was created to try to simplify the Basic Seven. So they had milk as its own group, meat as its own group, fruits and veggies, and grains. And it emphasized, once again, eating from each group daily. In the 50s, I forget which year, Health and Human Services was established. I think it was actually 1953 under Eisenhower. Health and Human Services was established as a separate department, and they worked hand in hand with USDA for dietary guidelines. For those wondering why it's not Health and Human Services giving out the guidelines and why it's the Department of Agriculture, it just has to do with the fact that Health and Human Services is 90 years younger. So they have input into it, but it started with the USDA and continued with them. Up to that point, everything focused on nutrients, trying to get food from each group to make sure that you're balancing nutrients. There's a little bit of calories involved, but ultimately it was on getting enough nutrients. In 1977, the McGovern report kind of shifted the focus. It hinted at disease prevention. So it took the Basic Four, but also added a sweets and fat group, starting to realize that Americans are eating things that are possibly less nutritious, and they recognize that there is a role for nutrition to play in disease prevention. In the 1980s, the first dietary guidelines for Americans was published. Clearly, I didn't delete the 1940s Basic 7 in there when I copied and pasted this slide to create it. That's my bad. You can ignore that. But the first dietary guidelines for Americans was designed for disease prevention. And this is where, as a nutrition coach, but not a registered dietitian, dietary coaching laws are different from state to state. In some states, you cannot treat or you cannot give any nutrition advice unless you are a registered dietitian. As a nutrition coach, I can give recommendations, but I cannot give specific meal plans. I can give suggestions, and I cannot use nutrition to try to treat chronic disease. So the idea of dietary guidelines for disease treatment and prevention really is the purview of registered dietitians, and that was first kind of introduced in the 1980s. In 92, that was when the infamous food pyramid came out. It was a simple visual of the then 5 groups, the Basic Four plus the sweets and fats group. It was a simple visual showing those, and it had recommended servings of each, which, as we now know, might not have been the best suggestion with grains and whole grains at the base of the pyramid. In 2011, the food pyramid disappeared. Michelle Obama undertook a lot of this. It was the goal to have America move. The South Park episode gets into it. And the idea was the MyPlate visual was simpler, and rather than having a pyramid and recommended servings, which can still be confusing, what constitutes a serving, MyPlate was very simple, very actionable. It's a picture. I have it on a following slide, and it shows you how to set up your plate when you're eating. It's very, very straightforward. And in 2015 through 2020, they started expanding the MyPlate model to include specific modifications for infants, toddlers, and pregnant women. So until the newest recommendations, it was myplate.gov. So you can see, make half your plate fruits and veggies, focus on whole fruits, vary your veggies. For dairy, that's off to the side, recommending low fat. Half your grains should be whole grains, vary your protein, but ultimately it's half your plate is fruits and veggies, quarter of your plate is grains. Focus half those grains as whole grains, and it's focusing on protein. Choose foods and beverages with less added sugar, saturated fat, and sodium. It mentions activity as well. Being active can help you prevent disease and manage your weight. And in a separate video, I covered the presidential fitness test and the history of that, and how alongside of this, they got rid of the medals awarded for the presidential fitness test, and the goal was on individualizing exercise recommendations based on the needs of the person you're treating. So MyPlate.gov, I've talked about this before, it aligns very well with the way that we encourage our clients to start setting up their plate. It actually aligns with the way that Canada recommends setting up their plate. So since Health and Human Services is in some cases trying to base what we do here on what other countries do, vaccine schedule is now supposedly in line with what Denmark does. Canada was a reference for MyPlate.gov, and now we've kind of supposedly revolutionized the food pyramid. So the so-called new guidelines, I have that in quotations. Once again, they've inverted the pyramid, which hard to take the message seriously when you're referencing a South Park episode. So at face value, it's easy to dismiss this as a joke. But if you look at the actual recommendations for the next 5 years, 2025 to 2030, and this is straight from the new USDA site for the guidelines, which is realfood.gov. Used to be myplate.gov. If you try to go to myplate.gov, it will redirect you to realfood.gov. Again, while it may seem like a joke at face value, the actual nutritional guidelines are to prioritize protein at every meal. I just posted an Instagram video where protein has really become a marketing label. If you're going to prioritize protein, go for protein sources. A protein source is a food in which the vast majority of the calories come from protein. The examples I gave were the Kodiak Power Cups, the muffin cups, which has 12 grams of protein, and it's listed right on the box. That's 48 calories from protein. It's 4 calories per gram out of 260 calories. So while it has protein in it, it is not a protein source. Lean meats, fish, egg whites, there's a ton of different protein sources. That's what they're trying to prioritize here. You can 100% get behind that. Full-fat dairy is a little bit of a deviation. MyPlate suggested low-fat dairy with no added sugars. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that, provided that your total fat intake is managed. Eat fruits and veggies throughout the day, focusing on whole forms. So instead of juices, great. Incorporate healthy fats from whole foods, meats, seafood, eggs, nuts, seeds, olives, and avocados. That's fine. Whole grains, while sharply reducing refined carbs. Limit highly processed added sugars and artificial additives. Don't really care about artificial additives, but highly processed food, that is a great recommendation. Once again, people like to demonize carbohydrates, refined carbohydrates, as making America fat. That's why the food pyramid got demonized. If you replace refined carbohydrates with whole grains, you will have a net positive benefit in your dietary routine. The problem with highly processed food is not just the sugars, it's the combination of sodium, sugar, and fat. So it's all three things. Trying to minimize them is a great recommendation for people trying to lose weight and get healthy. Specific guidelines vary, and I like this. It's individualized. Eat the right amount for you based on age, sex, size, and activity level. And if you actually go to the website, it gives you a breakdown of how much of each thing you should be eating based on your daily caloric intake. Choose water and unsweetened beverages to support hydration. That's good advice. And limit alcohol consumption for better overall health. This is a little bit softer in messaging than, limit as opposed to avoid. I personally don't have a problem with that. But if you think about the purpose of the USDA guidelines, you're trying to manage population as opposed to individual freedoms. So I don't have a problem with the harsher language either. I could go either way on this. At the end of the day, these are pretty solid guidelines. And when we are working one-on-one with nutrition clients, these are the type of things that we suggest. My video on Instagram the other day, my number one tip. This was literally right before the announcement of the food pyramid. My number one tip for people for nutrition was to prioritize protein. And then lo and behold, pyramid drops. So again, while it's easy to dismiss it because of the messaging surrounding it, which seems like a joke, these are not bad guidelines at all. The confusion, I think, stems from the messengers around it. And if you look at the protein, dairy, and healthy fats, we are ending the war on protein. What fucking war? There is no war on protein. They're talking about the food pyramid has failed Americans. The food pyramid has not been a thing since 2011. So once again, to me, that's something of a straw man argument. You're attacking these recommendations. And at the end of the day, the more we learn about nutrition, and food nutrition science is relatively new, guidelines are constantly updated. The problem in the past has never been the guidelines themselves. It has been a lack of adherence to the guidelines. So there was nothing wrong with the old guidelines either. It's that people weren't following them. And we'll get into that in a minute. But Dr. Oz flat out said alcohol is a social lubricant, and if you and your buddies are going to get together and drink, make responsible decisions, and that's not a bad thing. Once again, when you're trying to send this message to a population as a whole, I am opposed to that. When it comes to treating individuals, that is a decision that we try to help people make for themselves. Is alcohol, when you're looking at an individual holistically, and we're talking about mental health, stress management, social anxiety, and so on and so forth, there is an argument to be made in some cases that alcohol in moderation is not a bad thing for a net overall positive. If it helps, ideally people have better outlets for stress than alcohol, but not everybody is ideal. So in some cases we make that recommendation, but again, that is a one-on-one conversation to be had. It is not something that I would recommend for the population as a whole. Again, there's confusion about fructose and seed oil, claiming that these things are dangerous. If you replace saturated fats with polyunsaturated fats that you find in seed oils, in every single case, when calories are equated, seed oil leads to better health outcomes. That's what the evidence shows, and that's been demonized by this administration. Fructose gets a bad rap, largely because of high fructose corn syrup, but in some cases I've seen administration officials tell you not to eat fruit because fructose, which is only processed in the liver, will make you fat. And by that logic, fruit will make you fat. So that's a little bit contradictory when they're telling you to eat vegetables and fruits throughout the day, but fructose makes you fat, so you shouldn't eat fruit. Contradiction there. Same goes for saturated fats when they're telling you to limit saturated fats, but you should be eating healthy fats from seafood and meats, full-fat dairy, and all that. Conflicting messaging there. And then, of course, the focus on high fructose corn syrup, which there's two different varieties of that. The one that we mostly use in the United States is 55% fructose and 45% glucose. Trying to replace that with cane sugar, which, because it's natural, it's supposedly healthier for you. Cane sugar is 50% glucose and 50% fructose. So you're talking about a 5% difference. It makes functionally no difference whatsoever. Focusing on food dyes and demonizing them, really stuff that's not going to impact health outcomes. That's been my problem with this administration, is the messaging and all this conflicting messaging and focusing on low-hanging fruit here. So if you ignore the messengers, the message itself right here is not bad. So I would say stick to the guidelines and avoid the people. My final thoughts on this, a lot of it will depend on the path forward. They're talking about focusing on eating whole foods and that's what Americans should do. That is a great message, but what are they going to do to make whole foods accessible? The reason that we are in the situation we are in is food subsidies. If you look at the foods that are subsidized, they are all grains. Corn in particular is the most heavily subsidized crop that we grow in the United States. That is why high fructose corn syrup is so cheap to produce. I just saw they passed, they updated the SNAP requirements to limit unhealthy foods. If you're going to do that, then you need to expand access to healthy foods. It's easy to tell people, hey, this is what you should be eating. If you don't have access to it, you're shit out of luck. So while these recommendations are great, and the libertarian model is individual responsibility, the USDA, the vast majority of its budget goes towards supporting food programs. They need to revamp those food programs to enable access to whole foods. So if they're going to push these recommendations, I'm waiting to see them step up and implement policy that's going to actually help people follow these recommendations. We'll see what happens. I remain skeptical that that's going to change, but as good as the guidelines are, those of us that are lucky enough to have access to these foods can follow them, hopefully. But for the vast majority of people on these food assistance programs, that may not be a reality. So, end of the day, the guidelines are nothing new. They're not bad. The confusion is largely created by the people pushing the message. So look at the message itself, ignore the messengers, and hopefully they get their shit together and push forward some policies that actually make it a reality for most people to follow these recommendations. That's all we got for today. We'll see you in the gym.